Ezra Blackwood had spent 28 years believing his father's bitter truth, that love was nothing but a lie that destroyed men. But when he found a wounded stranger trapped beneath an overturned wagon in the Montana wilderness, everything he thought he knew about survival would be tested in ways no amount of solitude had prepared him for. Could a man raised on hatred learn to fight for something more precious than his own life? The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder, and Ezra Blackwood lowered his rifle with steady hands. The elk crashed through the underbrush before falling silent among the pine trees. Another clean kill. Another day of survival in the Montana Territory wilderness. But as he walked toward his prize, something felt different about this October morning in 1867. The air tasted sharper. The shadows seemed longer. Even his horse, Duke, stamped nervously behind him, ears twitching at sounds Ezra couldn't hear. "Easy, boy," Ezra muttered, running his hand along the animal's neck. Duke had been his only companion for 3 years now, ever since the old man died. The horse understood him better than any person ever had. Ezra's boots crunched through the frost-covered leaves as he approached the fallen elk. Steam rose from the animal's body in the cold air. He'd learned to hunt from his father, but he'd learned to hunt alone by choice. People disappointed you. Animals didn't lie or break promises or leave you when times got hard. His father's voice still whispered in his head sometimes, especially during the quiet moments like this. "Love's just another word for weakness, boy. Trust nobody but your gun and your horse." The old man had repeated those words like a prayer, right up until the day he died alone in their cabin, bitter and empty as a dried well. Ezra pulled out his knife and began the familiar work of field dressing. The meat would last him 2 weeks if he smoked it right, maybe longer if the weather stayed cold. Winter was coming early this year. He could feel it in his bones. As he worked, memories drifted through his mind like smoke. His mother had left when he was 7, disappearing one morning without a word. His father had found her letter on the kitchen table. "I can't live like this anymore." That was all. No goodbye for her son. No explanation. Just empty rooms and the sound of his father's bitter laughter. "Women," the old man had said, crumpling the letter. "They'll break your heart every time if you let them." Ezra had believed him. Why wouldn't he? The evidence was right there in their empty house, in his father's drinking, in the way the old man's eyes went cold whenever he mentioned love or family or any of the things other people seemed to care about. But sometimes, late at night when the fire burned low, Ezra wondered what it might be like to have someone to talk to. Someone who cared whether he came home or not. Someone who'd worry if he didn't return from a hunt. He shook his head, pushing the foolish thoughts away. The elk's blood stained his hands red as he worked. This was real. This was honest. Survival didn't need pretty words or false promises. A sound made him look up. Duke was staring into the trees, his head high and alert. Ezra listened, but heard only wind through the branches. Still, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. He finished his work quickly, loading the meat onto Duke's back. They'd been in these mountains for 2 weeks now, following the herds deeper into the wilderness. Most hunters wouldn't come this far from town, but Ezra wasn't most hunters. He preferred the empty places where a man could think without interruption. As they rode back toward his camp, Ezra noticed fresh tracks in the mud beside a stream. Human tracks. Boot prints heading north, toward the pass that led to Fort Benton. 3, maybe 4 people. One of the prints was smaller than the others. A woman's boot. He studied the tracks for a long moment. Travelers were rare in these parts, especially this late in the season. Most folks had enough sense to stay close to town when winter threatened. But these tracks were fresh, maybe a day old. Ezra urged Duke forward. It wasn't his business who else was traveling through the territory. He had his own concerns, his own life to worry about. Getting involved with strangers only led to trouble. But as they climbed the rocky trail toward his camp, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The tracks had been moving fast, almost running. And there had been something else in the mud beside them. Dark stains that might have been blood. His camp sat in a clearing beside a small lake, hidden from the main trails by thick pine trees. Ezra had built a lean-to shelter against a large boulder, with a fire pit ringed by stones. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind off and the rain out. All a man really needed. He hung the elk meat from a tree branch and started a fire. The flames danced against the growing darkness, casting long shadows across the clearing. As he cooked his dinner, Ezra tried to push thoughts of the tracks from his mind. Not his problem, not his concern, but his father's warnings echoed in his head like a curse. Trust nobody but your gun and your horse. The old man had been right about that, at least. People brought nothing but pain and disappointment. Better to stay alone, stay safe, stay strong. Ezra ate his meal in silence, watching the stars appear between the tree branches. Tomorrow he'd head back toward town with his meat. Winter was coming, and even he couldn't survive in the mountains once the snow got deep. He'd find a warm place to wait out the cold months. Maybe take some work chopping wood or hauling supplies. Come spring, he'd be back in the wilderness where he belonged. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, and Duke nickered softly. Ezra reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded and ready. The wilderness might be beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Only the strong survived out here. As he settled down for the night, wrapping himself in thick blankets beside the fire, Ezra wondered again about those tracks. Where had the travelers been going? What had they been running from? And why couldn't he stop thinking about that small boot print in the mud? But morning would bring new concerns, new challenges. For now he was alive, warm, and fed. That was enough. It had to be enough. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up toward the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate. Ezra closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his dreams were filled with empty cabins and the sound of his father's bitter laughter. The screams split the morning air like a knife, high and desperate and unmistakably human. Ezra jerked awake, his hand already reaching for his rifle. The sound had come from somewhere north of his camp, maybe half a mile away. Duke was on his feet, ears pricked forward, muscles tense beneath his dark coat. Another scream, weaker this time but still carrying the sharp edge of panic. A woman's voice. Ezra cursed under his breath. He'd been hoping to break camp early and start the long ride back to town. The last thing he needed was to get mixed up in someone else's trouble. But that voice. There was something about it that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. He saddled Duke quickly, checking his weapons. The Winchester was loaded and ready. His pistol sat heavy in its holster. Whatever was happening out there, he'd be prepared for it. The trail led through thick forest, winding between massive pine trees and over rocky outcrops. Ezra followed the sound of the voice, moving carefully through the underbrush. Years of hunting had taught him to move quietly, to read the signs that others missed. Fresh horse tracks scarred the muddy trail, mixed with the prints of heavy boots. At least 4 men, maybe more. Their horses had been moving fast, but the tracks were already a day old. Whatever had happened here, it was over now. But then he heard it again. A faint cry for help, coming from somewhere ahead. Ezra urged Duke forward, following the sound through a grove of aspen trees whose golden leaves rustled like whispers in the wind. He found her in a small clearing beside an overturned wagon. The woman was trapped beneath one of the heavy wooden wheels, her left leg pinned against the rocky ground. Dark hair spilled across her dirt-streaked face, and her blue dress was torn and muddy. But it was her eyes that caught Ezra's attention, large and brown and filled with a determination that surprised him. "Please," she gasped when she saw him. "Help me." Ezra dismounted slowly, studying the scene. The wagon had been traveling north when it crashed. Boxes and barrels were scattered across the clearing, their contents spilled onto the ground. Medical supplies, from the look of them. Bottles of medicine, bandages, a doctor's bag. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Name's Ezra. What happened here?" "Bandits," she whispered, struggling weakly against the wagon's weight. "They attacked us yesterday. Took my father." She winced as pain shot through her trapped leg. "I'm Isabel Reyes. We were traveling to Fort Benton when they came." Ezra knelt beside the wagon, studying the situation. The wheel was heavy, but he'd lifted heavier things before. The woman's leg didn't look broken, but it was clearly hurt. She'd been trapped here all night, probably fighting to stay conscious. "This is gonna hurt," he warned, gripping the wagon's side. "But I need to lift this wheel off you." Isabel nodded, biting her lip. "Do it." Ezra planted his feet and lifted with all his strength. The wagon rose slowly, groaning under its own weight. Isabel cried out as the pressure released, but she managed to pull her leg free. When Ezra set the wagon down, she was breathing hard but conscious. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was going to die here." Ezra examined her leg carefully. It was bruised and swollen, but nothing seemed broken. Still, she wouldn't be walking anywhere soon. "Can you tell me what happened?" Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "There were 4 of them, maybe 5. They surrounded our wagon just after dawn yesterday. My father, he's a doctor. We were bringing medical supplies to the mining camps." She gestured toward the scattered boxes. "They wanted the medicine, said they could sell it for good money." "Where'd they take your father?" "North, toward the pass. Their leader, he said something about a hideout in the mountains." Isabel tried to sit up, then gasped as pain shot through her leg. "You have to help him. He's all I have left." Ezra felt something twist in his chest. The woman's faith in him was startling, but also terrifying. She was looking at him like he was some kind of hero, when he was just a man who'd happened to hear her screams. "I'm not a lawman," he said carefully. "I'm just a hunter. But you'll help us, won't you?" Isabel's eyes met his, and Ezra felt that strange stirring again. "Please, my father's a good man. He spent his whole life helping people. He doesn't deserve to die because of some bandit's greed." Ezra stood up, pacing to the edge of the clearing. His father's voice whispered in his head, "Not your problem, boy. Walk away while you still can." The smart thing would be to help her get to town, then forget about her and her father. Getting involved with other people's troubles only led to pain. But when he looked at Isabel, saw the hope and desperation in her eyes, something shifted inside him. Maybe it was the way she'd said, "Please," like she truly believed he could save them. Maybe it was the memory of his own father dying alone, bitter and unloved. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles from here," he said finally. "We can shelter there while your leg heals. But I can't promise anything about your father." Isabel's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. God bless you, Ezra." Nobody had ever blessed him before. The words felt strange in his ears, but not unpleasant. Ezra helped Isabel onto Duke's back, then gathered what he could from the scattered supplies. The bandits had taken most of the valuable medicine, but they'd left behind some basic supplies. As they rode toward the cabin, Isabel told him more about her father. Dr. Reyes had been a surgeon in San Francisco before deciding to bring his skills to the frontier. He'd spent the last 2 years traveling between mining camps and settlements, treating injuries and diseases that other doctors wouldn't touch. "He says everyone deserves to be saved," Isabel said softly. "Rich or poor, saint or sinner. He's never turned anyone away." The words hit Ezra harder than he expected. Nobody had ever thought him worth saving. His own mother had abandoned him. His father had raised him to believe that love was a lie and people were nothing but trouble. But listening to Isabel talk about her father, Ezra began to wonder if maybe there were different kinds of people in the world. People who helped instead of hurt. People who stayed instead of left. The cabin appeared through the trees like a gift from heaven. It was small and weathered, but the roof looked solid and the walls were thick. Ezra had sheltered here before during storms. It would do. He helped Isabel inside, settling her on a pile of old blankets near the stone fireplace. The cabin was dusty and cold, but it was dry and defensible. If the bandits came looking for them, at least they'd have walls to hide behind. "Rest now," Ezra said, building a fire. "We'll figure out what to do about your father tomorrow." But as he watched the flames dance in the fireplace, Ezra knew he was lying to himself. He was already planning the rescue, already thinking about how to track the bandits to their hideout. Isabel's faith in him had awakened something he'd thought was dead, the desire to be worthy of someone's trust. For the first time in his life, Ezra Blackwood was beginning to understand what it meant to care about someone else more than himself. And that terrified him more than any bandit ever could. "We're not alone." Ezra's whispered words made Isabel freeze as she tried to stand by the cabin window. Outside, the morning mist clung to the pine trees like ghostly fingers, but something was moving through the white curtain. Something that didn't belong in the forest. Isabel grabbed Ezra's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "What do you see?" "Horses. Maybe 3 of them." Ezra kept his voice low, reaching for his rifle. "They're being careful, staying in the trees. Could be the same bandits who took your father." Fear shot through Isabel's chest like ice water. She'd barely escaped them once. Her legs still throbbed where the wagon wheel had trapped her, and she could barely walk without help. "If they found her here, what do we do?" she whispered. Ezra studied the forest through the cracked window glass. The riders were still out there, moving slowly through the mist. They knew someone was in the cabin, but they weren't sure how many or how well armed. "Stay quiet," he said. "Maybe they'll move on." But even as he spoke, Ezra knew it was wishful thinking. Bandits didn't just wander around the wilderness for fun. They were looking for something, or someone. Isabel sank back onto the pile of blankets, trying to control her breathing. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, like a trap instead of a shelter. The walls that had seemed so protective last night now felt thin as paper. "Tell me about your father," Ezra said quietly, keeping his eyes on the window. "What's he really like?" Isabel looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because if we're gonna die in here, I want to know who I'm dying for." The blunt words should have scared her, but instead they made her feel stronger. Ezra wasn't sugarcoating their situation or making false promises. He was treating her like an adult who could handle the truth. "Papa's the kindest man I've ever known," she said softly. "When I was little, he used to stay up all night with sick patients. Mama would scold him for not coming home, but he'd say, 'How can I eat dinner when someone else is suffering?'" Ezra listened while watching the trees. One of the horses had moved closer to the cabin. Its rider was careful to stay hidden, but Ezra caught a glimpse of a dirty brown coat and a battered hat. "After Mama died of the fever 2 years ago, Papa threw himself into his work even more," Isabel continued. "He said helping others was the only way to make sense of losing her. That's why we came west. There are so many people out here who need medical care." "Sounds like a good man," Ezra said, and he meant it. The world needed more people like Dr. Reyes, not fewer. A branch snapped somewhere outside. Ezra tensed, finger on his rifle trigger. The sound had come from behind the cabin, which meant they were being surrounded. "Isabel," he said carefully, "I need you to listen to me. There's a root cellar behind the fireplace. Stone steps leading down into the ground. If shooting starts, you get down there and don't come out until I tell you." "What about you?" "I'll handle this." Ezra checked his pistol, making sure it was loaded. "These aren't the first bandits I've dealt with." That wasn't exactly true. Ezra had avoided people for so long that he'd never really fought anyone except wild animals. But Isabel didn't need to know that. She needed to believe he could protect her. A voice called out from the forest, rough and mocking. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful and nobody gets hurt." Ezra recognized the voice. It was the same man who'd called out during the attack on Isabel's wagon. The bandit leader had come back to finish what he started. "What do you want?" Ezra shouted back. "The girl. She can identify us to the law." "Can't have that." A pause. "Send her out and you can ride away. No harm done." Isabel's face went white. "Don't listen to him, Ezra. They'll kill you the moment I step outside." Ezra knew she was right. Bandits didn't leave witnesses, especially ones who'd seen their faces. But the alternative was a gunfight with odds that weren't in their favor. "I'm thinking," Ezra called out, buying time. His mind raced through possibilities. The cabin had 2 windows and 1 door. The bandits probably had them covered from 3 sides, leaving only the back wall clear. But there was no exit that way. Unless Ezra remembered something about this cabin from his previous visits. The old trapper who'd built it had been paranoid about Indian raids. He'd carved a tunnel from the root cellar to a hidden exit 50 yards away in the woods. "Isabel," Ezra whispered urgently. "When I say run, you get to that cellar as fast as you can. Follow the tunnel all the way to the end. Don't stop. Don't look back. No matter what you hear. I won't leave you." "Yes, you will." Ezra's voice was firm but gentle. "Because if something happens to me, you're the only one who can save your father. And I think he'd want his daughter to live." Tears filled Isabel's eyes, but she nodded. She understood. Sometimes survival meant making impossible choices. "Time's up," the bandit leader shouted. "Send out the girl or we're coming in." Ezra took a deep breath, said a prayer to whatever God might be listening, and kicked over the table to use as cover. "Come and take her," he yelled back. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence like thunder. Wood splinters exploded from the cabin wall as bullets tore through the thin planks. Ezra grabbed Isabel's hand. "Run! Now!" They dove toward the fireplace as more shots rang out. Isabel found the hidden stairs and disappeared into the darkness below. Ezra heard her stumbling down the stone steps, then the scrape of her feet in the tunnel. A bandit appeared at the front window, rifle raised. Ezra's Winchester spoke first, and the man tumbled backward with a scream. But two more shapes were moving toward the door. Ezra had maybe 30 seconds before they broke through. Time enough to make a choice that would change everything. He could follow Isabel into the tunnel, escape with her and leave this fight behind. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. His father would have called him a fool for even considering anything else. But as Ezra heard Isabel's footsteps echoing in the tunnel below, he realized something had changed inside him. For the first time in his life, he had something worth fighting for. Someone who believed he was better than he thought he was. The door exploded inward, and two bandits rushed inside with guns drawn. Ezra stepped out from behind the overturned table, rifle ready, and discovered what it felt like to fight for love instead of just survival. The difference was everything. "You picked the wrong fight, stranger." The bandit leader stood in the doorway, smoke still curling from his pistol barrel. His two men flanked him on either side, their weapons trained on Ezra's chest. But their eyes held the nervous look of men who'd lost one of their own. Ezra kept his rifle steady, though his heart was pounding like a war drum. The dead bandit lay sprawled beneath the broken window, his blood staining the cabin floor. 3 against 1 wasn't good odds, but Ezra had something these men didn't, a reason to live beyond the next few minutes. "Where's the girl?" the leader demanded. He was a big man with a scarred face and cold gray eyes, the kind of man who'd learned early that violence solved most problems. "Gone," Ezra said simply. "Don't lie to me." The leader took a step forward. "I heard her voice just minutes ago. She's here somewhere." From somewhere deep underground, Ezra could hear the faint sound of Isabel moving through the tunnel. The bandits hadn't noticed it yet, but they would soon. He needed to keep their attention focused on him. "Name's Jake Morrison," the leader said, as if introductions mattered in a Mexican standoff. "Maybe you heard of me. I run things in these mountains." "Never heard of you," Ezra replied. "Must not be as important as you think." Morrison's face darkened. "Important enough to know that girl can hang us all if she talks to the law. Important enough to know you just made a very bad enemy." Ezra almost smiled. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a lone hunter, probably figured him for easy prey. They didn't know about the years of survival in the wilderness, the countless hours of tracking dangerous game, the cold patience that came from living alone with only your skills to keep you alive. "What did you do with her father?" Ezra asked. "The doc," Morrison shrugged. "He's our insurance. Good bargaining chip if we need him. Course, if his daughter don't cooperate, he might have an accident." Rage flared in Ezra's chest, hot and sudden. These men had taken an innocent doctor who spent his life helping people. They'd trapped his daughter under a wagon and left her to die. They represented everything ugly about the world, everything his father had warned him about. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd hurt someone Ezra cared about. "Here's what's gonna happen," Morrison continued. You're gonna tell us where the girl went. Then you're gonna help us find her. Do that and maybe we'll let you live. And if I don't? Morrison's grin was all teeth and malice. Then we'll kill you slow and track her ourselves. Either way, she don't leave these mountains alive. Ezra felt something cold settle in his stomach. These weren't just bandits, they were killers who enjoyed their work. The kind of men who'd murder a doctor for his medicine and think nothing of shooting an unarmed woman. His father's voice whispered in his head. This is what people are like. Boy, they'll take everything you care about and laugh while they do it. But Isabel's voice was stronger. Everyone deserves to be saved. Even him. Even a man raised on bitterness and isolation. Isabel had seen something in him worth saving, worth believing in. Now it was time to prove she was right. I got a counteroffer, Ezra said quietly. Yeah? What's that? You boys turn around and ride out of here. Forget about the girl. Forget about the doctor. Find honest work somewhere far away. Morrison laughed. A sound like gravel in a tin can. Or what? Or I kill all three of you. The words hung in the air like a promise. Morrison's laughter died as he saw something in Ezra's eyes. The cold certainty of a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't be swayed from it. Big talk from one man, Morrison said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Your friend there thought the same thing. Ezra nodded toward the dead bandit. How'd that work out for him? One of Morrison's men shifted nervously. Boss, maybe we should. Shut up, Morrison snapped. He's bluffing. No man fights 3-to-1 odds for some woman he just met. But Ezra could see doubt creeping into their faces. They'd expected easy prey, not a man willing to die for a stranger. Their kind understood greed and fear, but they couldn't comprehend sacrifice. That was their weakness. Last chance, Ezra said. Right away. Morrison's face twisted with anger. Kill him. The cabin exploded into violence. Ezra dove sideways as 3 guns fired at once, bullets chewing splinters from the wall behind him. He rolled behind the overturned table, came up firing. His first shot took Morrison's left-hand man in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second shot missed, but it sent the other bandit scrambling for cover. Morrison rushed forward, trying to get close enough for a sure kill. But Ezra was already moving, using his knowledge of the cabin to stay one step ahead. He'd sheltered here before, knew every creaking board and shadowed corner. A bullet grazed his arm, drawing blood but nothing more. Ezra ignored the pain, focused on the deadly dance of survival. This wasn't like hunting elk or tracking wolves. This was war, brutal and personal. Morrison appeared around the edge of the fireplace, gun raised. Ezra was ready for him. His Winchester barked once, and Morrison staggered backward, clutching his chest. The bandit leader's eyes went wide with shock and pain. Impossible, Morrison gasped, blood frothing at his lips. Nobody fights that hard for a woman. He collapsed, his unfired gun clattering across the wooden floor. The remaining bandit, the one Ezra had wounded, was trying to reload his rifle with shaking hands. Blood streamed from his shoulder, making his fingers clumsy. Drop it, Ezra commanded. His rifle trained on the man's heart. The bandit looked at his dead companions, then at Ezra's cold eyes. His weapon clattered to the floor. Please, he whispered. I was just following orders. I got a family back in Kansas City. Ezra studied the man for a long moment. Part of him, the part that sounded like his father, wanted to pull the trigger. These men had threatened Isabel, would have killed her without hesitation. They deserved whatever they got. But another voice spoke up, gentle and forgiving. Everyone deserves to be saved. Where's the doctor? Ezra asked. Hidden camp, 2 miles north. Follow the creek to where it splits, then take the left fork. There's a cave behind some fallen rocks. The words tumbled out in a rush. He's alive, I swear. Morrison wanted to keep him healthy in case we needed a bargaining chip. Ezra nodded slowly. Get out of here. Don't come back. If I see you again, I won't be so generous. The bandit scrambled for the door, clutching his wounded shoulder. Within seconds, The sound of galloping hooves faded into the distance. Ezra sat down heavily on the edge of the fireplace, suddenly exhausted. The cabin reeked of gunpowder and blood. 3 men had entered alive. Only one had left that way. But for the first time in his life, Ezra had fought for something bigger than himself. He'd fought for love, and won. Now came the hard part, proving that love could save more than just Isabel. It was time to rescue her father. "Papa!" Isabel's cry echoed through the hidden tunnel as she stumbled toward the cave entrance. Her injured leg screamed with every step, but she pushed forward through the darkness. Behind her, the sound of gunfire had finally stopped. Either Ezra was dead or the bandits were. She couldn't think about that now. The tunnel ended at a narrow opening behind a cluster of fallen boulders. Isabel squeezed through, emerging into bright afternoon sunlight that made her eyes water. The forest stretched out before her, peaceful and quiet, as if the violence at the cabin had never happened. But she could hear something else now. A man's voice, weak but familiar, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Help! Someone please!" Her father's voice. Isabel forgot about her pain, forgot about the bandits, forgot about everything except reaching the man who'd raised her. She limped through the trees, following the sound toward a small clearing where a cave mouth yawned like a hungry beast. Dr. Miguel Reyes sat slumped against the cave wall, his hands tied behind his back and his usually neat clothes torn and dirty. Blood crusted on his forehead where someone had hit him, but his eyes were alert and angry. "Isabel!" His face lit up with joy and terror. "My daughter, what are you doing here? It's not safe." She rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, I was so scared they'd killed you. How did you find me? Where are the bandits?" Dr. Reyes looked around nervously as Isabel worked to untie his bonds. "You shouldn't have come alone." "I'm not alone." Isabel's fingers struggled with the tight ropes. "There's a man named Ezra. He saved me when I was trapped under our wagon. He's fighting the bandits right now." "One man against all of them?" Her father's face went pale. "Isabel, we have to help him." "The ropes are too tight," Isabel said, frustration making her voice shake. "I can't get them loose." Dr. Reyes twisted his wrists, trying to give her more room to work. "There's a knife in my medical bag. The bandits threw it in the back of the cave when they searched through my supplies." Isabel hobbled deeper into the cave, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The bag sat against the far wall, its contents scattered across the rocky floor. Bottles of medicine, surgical tools, and bandages lay everywhere like the remains of a broken dream. She found the small knife her father used for delicate operations and hurried back to him. The blade was sharp enough to slice through the ropes in seconds. "Thank God," Dr. Reyes whispered, rubbing circulation back into his wrists. "Isabel, tell me about this man who helped you. Can we trust him?" Isabel thought about Ezra's gentle hands tending her injured leg, the way he'd risked his life to protect her from the bandits. "Yes, Papa. I think he's a good man who's forgotten how to believe in goodness." Her father studied her face with the keen eye of someone who'd spent years reading people's pain. "You care about him." It wasn't a question, but Isabel answered anyway. "Yes, and I think he cares about me too, even though he's trying not to." Dr. Reyes struggled to his feet, wincing as blood flow returned to his legs. "Then we better make sure he survives this day. A man who fights for love is worth saving." They gathered what they could from his scattered medical supplies. Most of the valuable medicine was gone, but the bandits had left behind basic items like bandages and antiseptic. If Ezra was hurt, they'd need these things. As they prepared to leave the cave, Dr. Reyes caught his daughter's arm. "Isabel, there's something you should know. The bandits, they weren't just after the medicine." "What do you mean?" "Their leader, Morrison, kept asking questions about you. Personal questions. Where you came from, if you had family in California, whether anyone would pay ransom for you." Dr. Reyes's face was grim. "I think they plan to sell you, daughter, to someone who collects young women for terrible purposes." Horror washed over Isabel like ice water. She'd known the bandits were dangerous, but this was worse than simple robbery. They'd seen her as merchandise, something to be bought and sold. All the more reason to stop them, she said quietly. They made their way through the forest toward the distant sound of voices. As they got closer, Isabel could hear Ezra talking to someone, calm, controlled, nothing like the panicked shouts she'd expected from a gunfight. Relief flooded through her. He was alive. They found him standing outside the cabin, washing blood from his hands in a bucket of water. 3 horses stood tied to nearby trees, their saddles and bridles removed. But only one rider was visible. A wounded man sitting on the ground with his back against a tree, pressing a bloody cloth to his shoulder. Ezra, Isabel called out. He spun around, his face lighting up with an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, overwhelming relief. In 3 quick strides, he reached her, and for a moment it seemed like he might sweep her into his arms. But then he caught himself, stepping back with a shy smile. You made it, he said simply. What happened here? Dr. Reyes asked, looking from the wounded bandit to the cabin where dark stains marked the wooden walls. Morrison and one of his men are dead, Ezra said. This one's going to live, assuming someone tends that shoulder wound soon. Dr. Reyes looked at his daughter, then at Ezra, then at the wounded bandit. His medical oath warred with his anger at the men who'd terrorized his family. But in the end, there was no real choice. Bring him inside, he said with a sigh. I'll patch him up. The bandit looked up in surprise. You'd help me? After what we did? I'm a doctor, Dr. Reyes said simply. I help people who are hurt. That's what doctors do. As they carried the wounded man into the cabin, Isabel watched Ezra's face. She could see him struggling to understand how her father could show mercy to someone who'd tried to kill them all. Your papa's a better man than I am, Ezra said quietly. No, Isabel replied. He's just had more practice at forgiveness. But you're learning. While Dr. Reyes worked on the bandit's shoulder, Isabel and Ezra sat outside the cabin, watching the sun sink toward the mountain peaks. The crisis was over, but somehow that made everything more complicated. What happens now? Isabel asked. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. I suppose you and your father will want to get to Fort Benton. Finish your journey. And you? I'll head back to town for the winter. Find some work to keep me busy until spring. Isabel felt her heart sink. After everything they'd been through, was he really going to just walk away? Ezra, Miss Isabel, he interrupted gently. I'm not the kind of man you should be thinking about. I don't know nothing about towns and civilized living. I'm better off in the wilderness. Are you? She asked, echoing his own words from days before. Because these past few days, I've seen who you really are, and it's not the man you think you are. Before Ezra could answer, Dr. Reyes emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. The patient will live, he announced, though he'll have a scar to remember this day by. He looked between his daughter and Ezra, reading the tension in their faces. I believe we need to have a conversation, Mr. Blackwood, about the future. Ezra stood up slowly, his face guarded. Sir, my daughter speaks very highly of you. She says you saved her life. Any decent man would have done the same. Dr. Reyes smiled. Would they? I've met many men in my travels, Mr. Blackwood. Decent ones, cruel ones, brave ones, cowardly ones. But I've rarely met one who fights like you did today. That wasn't just duty, that was love. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I don't know nothing about love. Ezra's words came out rougher than he intended, but Dr. Reyes didn't flinch. The older man settled beside him on a fallen log, his kind eyes studying Ezra's profile in the fading light. My wife used to say that love isn't something you know, Dr. Reyes said quietly. It's something you do. And today, you did something that required great love indeed. Inside the cabin, they could hear Isabel helping the wounded bandit drink some water. Even after everything the man had done, she was showing him kindness. Like father, like daughter, Ezra thought. Your daughter deserves better than a man like me, Ezra said. I don't have much education. Never lived in a proper town. My father raised me to believe that caring about people was just asking for heartbreak. And what do you believe now? Ezra looked toward the cabin where Isabel's gentle voice drifted through the open door. I think maybe my father was wrong about a lot of things. Dr. Reyes chuckled. Fathers often are. I know I've made my share of mistakes with Isabel, but one thing I've learned is that a man's worth isn't measured by his education or his bank account. It's measured by his character. What if that character's been shaped by years of isolation and bitterness? Then perhaps it's time to let it be shaped by something else. Dr. Reyes stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. Mr. Blackwood, I have a proposition for you. Ezra looked up, suspicious. What kind of proposition? I could use someone like you. Someone who knows the country, who can protect our medical supplies when we travel to the mining camps. The work would be dangerous, but it would also be meaningful. We'd be helping people who have nowhere else to turn. The offer hung between them like an unexpected gift. Ezra had been prepared for rejection, for Dr. Reyes to thank him politely and then take his daughter away forever. He hadn't been prepared for an invitation to become part of something larger than himself. I don't know anything about medical work, Ezra said. You don't need to. I need someone who can keep us safe while we do the healing. Someone who can navigate the wilderness and deal with the kind of men we met today. Dr. Reyes paused. Someone my daughter trusts. Before Ezra could respond, Isabel appeared in the doorway. The patient's resting, she said. He should be well enough to travel by morning. She looked between her father and Ezra, sensing the weight of their conversation. What are you two talking about? I was just explaining to Mr. Blackwood that we could use his help, Dr. Reyes said, if he's willing to leave his solitary life behind. Isabel's eyes widened with hope, but she tried to hide it. You don't have to decide right now, Ezra. It's a big change. Ezra stood up slowly, his mind racing. Everything he'd believed about himself, everything his father had taught him, said this was a mistake. Getting attached to people only led to pain. Caring about others made you weak, vulnerable. But looking at Isabel's face, seeing the hope she was trying so hard to conceal, Ezra realized something had fundamentally changed inside him. For the first time in his life, the thought of being alone felt worse than the risk of being hurt. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Dr. Reyes said. Take all the time you need. That night, as the three of them shared a simple meal of beans and hardtack, Ezra found himself watching the way Isabel and her father talked to each other. There was love there, yes, but also respect. They disagreed about things, which route to take to Fort Benton, how to handle the wounded bandit, but they listened to each other's opinions. Ezra had never seen a family that actually liked spending time together. His own childhood had been filled with silence and resentment. His father had spoken to him mainly to criticize or instruct, never just to share thoughts or feelings. Tell me about your medical missions, Ezra said suddenly. Dr. Reyes's face lit up. Well, there's a mining camp called Silver Creek about 40 miles north of Fort Benton. The miners there work in terrible conditions, cave-ins, explosions, accidents with the heavy machinery. They haven't seen a doctor in over a year. What about pay? Ezra asked practically. Some can pay in coin, others in goods or services. A few can't pay at all, but we treat them anyway. Dr. Reyes shrugged. Money isn't the point. The point is that everyone deserves medical care, regardless of their ability to pay. Isabel added, Papa once operated on a man's broken leg in exchange for a sack of potatoes and a promise to name his next child Miguel. Did he keep the promise? Ezra asked. Little Miguel Kowalski is probably walking around Silver Creek right now, Dr. Reyes said with a grin. Despite himself, Ezra smiled. There was something appealing about work that mattered beyond just survival. But old fears died hard. What if I'm not cut out for helping people? He asked. What if I let you down? Isabel reached across the small space between them and touched his hand. Ezra, you've already proven you can help people. You saved my life. You rescued my father. You fought 3 dangerous men to protect us. That was different. That was just what? Ezra struggled to find the words. Just something I had to do. Because you cared about us, Isabel said softly. Because somewhere in that heart you think is made of stone, you found room for love. Her hand was warm on his, small but steady. Ezra looked down at their joined fingers and felt something shift inside his chest. A door opening that had been locked his entire life. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of caring too much. Of getting attached and then losing everything." He looked up at her face, seeing understanding in her dark eyes. "My father always said love was just another word for pain." "And what do you think?" Isabel asked. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper through the pine trees. In the distance, an owl called to its mate, and somewhere even farther away, its call was answered. "I think," he said slowly, "that maybe pain is just another word for caring about something worth losing." Dr. Reyes cleared his throat gently. "So what's your answer, Mr. Blackwood? Will you join us?" Ezra looked at Isabel's hopeful face, at her father's kind smile, at the wounded bandit sleeping peacefully in the corner despite everything he'd done wrong. He thought about empty cabins and silent meals, about his father's bitter warnings and his mother's abandonment. Then he thought about Isabel's laughter, about the way she'd said his name like it meant something important, about the possibility of work that helped instead of just survived. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'll come with you." Isabel's face broke into a smile so bright it could have lit the whole cabin. Dr. Reyes clapped him on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the family business, Mr. Blackwood," the doctor said. Family. The word hit Ezra like a physical blow. But this time it didn't hurt. For the first time in his 28 years, he was part of something bigger than himself. Outside the cabin, the wounded bandit stirred in his sleep, murmuring words that might have been prayers or confessions. Tomorrow they'd send him on his way with bandages and a warning never to return. It was more mercy than he deserved, but mercy, Ezra was learning, wasn't about what people deserved. It was about what kind of person you chose to be. And for the first time in his life, Ezra Blackwood was choosing to be someone worth loving. "You don't belong here, stranger." The words cut through the morning bustle of Fort Benton like a knife, stopping conversations and turning heads. Ezra felt every eye in the trading post bore into him as he stood beside Dr. Reyes and Isabel, still wearing his dusty hunting clothes and carrying his weathered rifle. The speaker was a well-dressed man with a gold watch chain and polished boots, the kind of person who'd never spent a night sleeping under the stars. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Reyes said carefully, "this is Ezra Blackwood. He's working with us now, helping protect our medical supplies during transport." Hartwell's cold blue eyes swept over Ezra from head to toe, taking in every detail with obvious distaste. "A hired gun, you mean? Doctor, I thought you were a man of peace." "I am," Dr. Reyes replied, "but peace sometimes requires protection." The trading post had fallen silent except for the creak of wooden floorboards and the distant sound of horses in the street outside. Ezra could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him like a physical thing. Isabel moved closer to his side, and he caught the subtle gesture of support. But it also made him painfully aware of how different they were. She belonged in this world of proper clothes and polite conversation. He was just a wild man from the mountains. "I've heard stories about you, Blackwood," Hartwell continued. "They say you killed 3 men just yesterday. Is that the kind of help the good doctor needs?" Ezra's jaw tightened. "They were bandits. They would have killed innocent people." "So you say. But who's to judge whether your actions were necessary or simply the violence of a man who knows no other way?" The accusation hit Ezra harder than any physical blow. Was that what people would always see when they looked at him? A killer who solved problems with gunfire? "That's enough, Hartwell," Dr. Reyes said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood saved my daughter's life and my own. I won't have him insulted in my presence." But the damage was done. Ezra could see doubt creeping into the faces around him. These were civilized people who settled disputes with words and laws, not bullets. To them, he was exactly what Hartwell had called him, a man who knew only violence. "Perhaps," Hartwell said with a thin smile, "it would be better if your hired gun waited outside while we conduct our business." Before Dr. Reyes could protest, Ezra spoke up. "He's right. I'll wait with the horses." "Ezra, you don't have to," Isabel started. It's fine, Ezra said quietly. I need some air anyway. He walked out of the trading post with his head high, but inside, his father's voice was laughing. See, boy? This is what happens when you try to be something you're not. People like us don't belong in their world. Outside, Ezra leaned against a hitching post and watched the street life of Fort Benton flow around him. Merchants hawked their wares, children played in the dust, and women in clean dresses discussed the latest news from back east. Everyone seemed to have a place, a purpose, a community. Everyone except him. A young boy approached, maybe 10 years old, with curious eyes and a gap-toothed grin. Mister, is it true you killed 3 men with 1 rifle? Where'd you hear that? Ezra asked. My pa was talking to Mr. Henderson about it. He said you were faster than lightning and meaner than a rattlesnake. The boy's eyes were wide with admiration. That's so exciting. Ezra felt his stomach turn. Was this how he'd be remembered? As some kind of violent legend to thrill children with? Kid, killing ain't exciting. It's just sad and necessary sometimes. The boy's face fell. Oh, sorry, mister. As the child wandered away, Ezra wondered if Hartwell was right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe trying to change who he was just put good people like Isabel and her father in danger. 20 minutes later, Dr. Reyes and Isabel emerged from the trading post, their faces grim. Isabel carried a small bag of medical supplies, much smaller than what they'd hoped to purchase. What happened? Ezra asked. Hartwell convinced the other merchants that doing business with us was too risky, Dr. Reyes explained. They're afraid that associating with a known killer will hurt their reputations. Ezra felt like he'd been punched in the gut. I'm sorry. This is my fault. No, it's not, Isabel said fiercely. It's the fault of small-minded people who judge others without knowing the truth. But Ezra could see the disappointment in Dr. Reyes's eyes, the way the older man's shoulders sagged under the weight of their failure. They'd come to Fort Benton expecting to resupply for their medical missions. Instead, they were leaving with barely enough supplies to treat a handful of patients. Maybe I should go back to the mountains, Ezra said quietly. You'd be better off without me. Absolutely not, Isabel said before her father could respond. Ezra Blackwood, you listen to me. What happened in there says nothing about you and everything about them. You're a good man who did what needed to be done. But I'm holding you back. You heard what that Hartwell fellow said. I heard a pompous fool who's never had to make a life or death decision in his comfortable existence. Isabel interrupted. Papa, tell him. Dr. Reyes was quiet for a moment, studying Ezra's face. Son, do you know what I see when I look at you? Ezra shook his head. I see a man who risked his life for strangers. I see someone who chose mercy when he could have chosen revenge. I see a person learning to love after being taught only fear. Dr. Reyes placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder. Hartwell sees your guns and your scars and thinks he knows your story. But I see your heart. The words hit Ezra like a bomb on an old wound. But doubt still gnawed at him. What if he's right, though? What if I bring nothing but trouble? Then we'll face that trouble together, Isabel said simply. That's what families do. There was that word again. Family. It still felt foreign on Ezra's tongue, but less frightening than before. A commotion down the street caught their attention. A man on horseback was riding hard into town, his clothes torn and his face streaked with blood. People scattered out of his way as he pulled up in front of the sheriff's office. Help! The rider shouted. There's been an accident at the Silver Creek mine. Cave-in trapped a dozen men. We need a doctor. Dr. Reyes was already moving toward the man before he finished speaking. When did this happen? 3 hours ago, the rider gasped. We've been digging, but the tunnel's completely blocked. Some of the men are hurt bad, and we can't get them out. How many injured? At least 6 that we know of. Maybe more trapped deeper in the mine. Dr. Reyes turned to Isabel and Ezra, his face grim but determined. We have to go. Those men need medical attention immediately. But we don't have enough supplies, Isabel pointed out. We'll make do with what we have. Dr. Reyes was already calculating what they'd need. Ezra, Can you get us to Silver Creek quickly? I know the trail, Ezra said. It's rough country, but we can make it in 4 hours if we push hard. People were gathering around them now, listening to the conversation. Hartwell pushed through the crowd, his face skeptical. Doctor, surely you're not thinking of attempting this rescue with so few supplies, he said. It would be irresponsible. What would be irresponsible is letting those men die while we debate, Dr. Reyes replied sharply. But you'll need proper equipment, trained assistants. I'll need courage and skill, Dr. Reyes interrupted, both of which I have in abundance. Hartwell's eyes flicked to Ezra. And I suppose you're taking your gunmen as well? What use will violence be in a mine shaft? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ezra felt the familiar burn of shame in his chest, the old voice telling him he was nothing but destruction in human form. But then Isabel stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Mr. Hartwell, she said in a voice that carried across the entire crowd, let me explain something to you about Ezra Blackwood. Yesterday, he could have walked away when he found me trapped and dying. Instead, he risked his life to save a stranger. He could have abandoned my father to the bandits. Instead, he fought 3 armed men to protect someone he'd never met. Her voice grew stronger with each word. You see a man of violence. I see a man of sacrifice. You see someone who doesn't belong. I see someone who chooses to belong wherever help is needed. She turned to look directly at Ezra, her dark eyes blazing with conviction. And right now, those miners need every bit of strength, courage, and determination we can give them. They need someone who won't give up when things get dangerous. They need someone exactly like you. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Even Hartwell seemed taken aback by Isabel's passionate defense. Ezra felt something expand in his chest. Not just love for Isabel, but a growing understanding of who he might become. Not just a hunter or a killer, but a protector. Not just a man running from his past, but someone building a future worth believing in. Let's go save those miners, he said quietly. And for the first time since arriving in Fort Benton, Ezra Blackwood walked down the street with his head held high. The tunnels completely blocked. The mine foreman's words echoed off the rocky walls as he led them deeper into Silver Creek's main shaft. Oil lamps flickered in the darkness, casting dancing shadows that made the narrow passage feel even more cramped and dangerous. Ezra had never been inside a mine before. The weight of all that rock above his head made his skin crawl, and the stale air tasted of dust and fear. But behind him, Isabel and Dr. Reyes followed without complaint, their medical bags ready for whatever they might find. The accident happened in Shaft 3, the foreman explained, a grizzled man named Murphy whose weathered face showed every one of his 50 years underground. Support beam cracked and brought down half the ceiling. We got 4 men out alive, but there's still 8 trapped behind the cave-in. They reached a wider chamber where the rescued miners sat on wooden crates, their faces black with coal dust and their eyes hollow with shock. Dr. Reyes immediately went to work examining their injuries while Isabel prepared bandages and medicine. This man has a broken rib, Dr. Reyes announced after checking the first patient. And this one's got a deep gash on his arm that needs stitching. Ezra watched them work, feeling useless. In the wilderness, he knew how to help. Here, in this underground maze of tunnels and machinery, he was just another body taking up space. Blackwood, Murphy called out. You look strong. We could use your help moving some of the smaller rocks. Finally, something he could do. Ezra followed Murphy deeper into the mine, where a dozen men were working frantically to clear the blocked tunnel. The cave-in had brought down tons of rock and timber, creating a wall that stretched from floor to ceiling. We've been digging for hours, Murphy explained. But every time we move one rock, 2 more seem to fall down, and we're running out of time. What do you mean? Murphy's face was grim. There's a gas pocket behind that wall. If it builds up too much pressure, the whole mine could explode. We've got maybe 2 hours before we have to evacuate. Ezra felt his stomach clench. What about the trapped men? If we can't get them out by then? Murphy didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ezra joined the digging, hauling heavy rocks and broken timbers away from the cave-in. The work was backbreaking, made worse by the constant fear that more of the ceiling might collapse. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the cold dust until he could barely see. But with each rock they moved, they could hear voices from the other side, weak but alive. "Charlie? Charlie, you okay?" Someone called through the debris. "I'm here," came a muffled reply. "But Jake's hurt bad. He ain't moving much." Dr. Reyes appeared at Ezra's shoulder, having finished with the rescued miners. "How much longer until we break through?" "At this rate? 3, maybe 4 hours, Murphy said. "But we don't have that long." The doctor studied the wall of debris with calculating eyes. "What if we made a smaller opening? Just big enough for one person to crawl through?" "Might work," Murphy admitted. "But who's small enough to fit, and brave enough to risk it?" Before anyone could answer, Isabel stepped forward. "I am." "Absolutely not," Ezra said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "Ezra's right," Dr. Reyes agreed. "The tunnel could collapse completely." Isabel lifted her chin with the same defiance she'd shown in Fort Benton. "Papa, those men need medical attention now. Every minute we waste arguing is a minute closer to that gas explosion." "I won't let you risk your life," Ezra said firmly. "And I won't let 8 men die when I can help them." Isabel's eyes flashed with determination. "I'm small enough to fit through a narrow opening, and I know enough about medicine to provide basic treatment until we can get them out." Murphy looked between them, then at the wall of debris. "She's got a point. We could dig a tunnel just wide enough for her, shore it up with timber. Risky, but possible." "No," Ezra said again. "I'll go." "You're too big," Isabel pointed out. "Your shoulders would never fit through a space narrow enough to be safe." Ezra wanted to argue, but he could see she was right. The awful logic of the situation made his chest tight with fear. The woman he loved was volunteering to crawl into a death trap, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. "If I go," Isabel continued, "I can assess the injuries, provide immediate treatment, and help guide the rescue from the inside. It's the best chance those men have." Dr. Reyes closed his eyes for a moment, wrestling with the decision. When he opened them, his face was resigned but proud. "Very well, but you take a rope tied around your waist, and you come back at the first sign of trouble." "I will, Papa." The next hour was the longest of Ezra's life. He worked alongside the other miners to create a narrow tunnel through the debris, carefully placing support timbers to hold back the weight of rock above. Every few minutes, they'd hear the ominous groan of shifting stone, and everyone would freeze until the sound passed. Finally, Murphy called out, "That's it. We've got a hole." The opening was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, supported by a framework of wooden beams. It looked like a mouth ready to swallow anyone foolish enough to enter. Isabel checked her medical bag one final time, then looked at Ezra. "If something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen," Ezra said firmly. "You're coming back out of there." She smiled, stood on her toes, and kissed his cheek. "I love you, Ezra Blackwood." The words hit him like lightning. She loved him. This beautiful, brave, impossible woman loved him. "Isabel, tell me when I get back," she said, and disappeared into the narrow tunnel. Ezra knelt by the opening, listening to the sound of her progress. The scrape of cloth against rock, her careful breathing, the occasional small avalanche of pebbles. Behind him, the other miners continued working to widen the passage, but their efforts seemed pitifully slow. "I'm through." Isabel's voice echoed from the other side, muffled but clear. "I can see them." Relief flooded through Ezra, followed immediately by renewed worry. Getting in was only half the challenge. For the next 40 minutes, Isabel's voice guided them through what she found. 2 men with broken bones, one with a head injury, another trapped under a fallen beam. Her father called out instructions through the tunnel while she worked to stabilize the worst cases. But time was running out. Murphy kept checking his pocket watch, his face growing more worried with each passing minute. "Gas levels are rising," he announced quietly. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before this whole place becomes a powder keg." "How long to widen the tunnel enough to get everyone out?" Ezra asked. "An hour minimum," Ezra's blood turned to ice. They were going to run out of time. Unless, what if we create a diversion? He said suddenly. Something to vent the gas pressure? Murphy's eyes widened with understanding. You mean blow a hole in the far wall? Could work, but someone would have to set the charges manually. And they might not make it out before. I'll do it, Ezra said. Son, that's suicide. Ezra looked at the narrow tunnel where Isabel's voice still echoed, calm and professional as she treated injured men in impossible conditions. She'd risked everything to save strangers. Now it was his turn. Just tell me what to do, he said quietly. And for the second time in 2 days, Ezra Blackwood prepared to fight for love. This time against time itself, and the mountain that threatened to bury them all. The dynamite's getting wet. Murphy's shout echoed through the mine shaft as water began seeping through cracks in the ceiling. Each drop that hit the explosive charges made Ezra's heart skip a beat. Wet dynamite was unpredictable. It might not explode at all, or it might go off at the worst possible moment. How long do we have? Ezra asked, carefully positioning the last stick of dynamite against the far wall of the chamber. The plan was simple but deadly. Blow a hole through the rock to release the gas pressure, giving them time to rescue the trapped miners. But if the charges failed, or if he didn't get far enough away, maybe 5 minutes before the fuses get too damp to light, Murphy called back. And maybe 10 minutes before this whole mountain comes down on our heads. Behind them, through the narrow tunnel Isabel had crawled through, they could hear Dr. Reyes shouting instructions to his daughter. Keep pressure on that wound, Isabel, and check the man with the head injury again. I'm trying, Papa. Her voice came back, strained but determined. But I need more bandages, and there's so much blood. Ezra's hands shook as he connected the fuses. Isabel was trapped on the other side of that wall with 8 injured men, and he was about to set off an explosion that might save them all, or bury them forever. Blackwood. Murphy grabbed his arm. You don't have to do this. We can try another way. What other way? Ezra asked. You said it yourself, we're out of time. Murphy's weathered face was grim. This plan's got maybe a 50-50 chance of working. And even if it does, you might not make it out alive. Ezra thought about that for a moment. 6 months ago, the idea of dying wouldn't have bothered him much. He'd lived alone, cared for no one, expected nothing from life except another day of survival. But now he had Isabel's voice echoing in his memory. I love you, Ezra Blackwood. Now he had Dr. Reyes treating him like the son he'd never had. Now he had a future that stretched beyond just staying alive. A future worth living for. 50-50 odds are better than what those miners have if we do nothing, Ezra said quietly. He struck a match, the small flame bright in the darkness of the mine shaft. For a moment he hesitated. This could be the last thing he ever did. The last choice he ever made. But then Isabel's voice drifted through the tunnel again, calm and professional despite the danger. It's going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here. She believed in rescue. She believed in hope. She believed in him. Ezra touched the match to the fuses and ran. The explosion came exactly 30 seconds later. A thunderous roar that shook the entire mountain. Rocks rained down from the ceiling as Ezra dove behind a support beam, covering his head with his arms. The sound went on forever. Crashing, grinding, the mountain itself screaming in protest. Then silence. Ezra raised his head cautiously, his ears ringing. The air was thick with dust and smoke, but he was alive. More importantly, he could hear voices from the other side of the wall. Not screams of terror, but shouts of excitement. It worked, Murphy called out, coughing through the dust. The gas is venting. We can hear it whistling through the crack you made. Relief flooded through Ezra like cool water. But they weren't safe yet. The explosion had opened a narrow fissure in the rock wall, releasing the deadly gas pressure. But the trapped miners were still trapped. How much time do we have now? Ezra asked. Murphy consulted his watch again. Maybe an hour before the gas builds up again. But that crack you made, it's not big enough for people to fit through, and it's too dangerous to widen with more explosives. Then we go back to the original plan, Ezra said. We widen the tunnel Isabel went through. For the next 45 minutes, Every man in the mine worked like his life depended on it, because it did. They moved rocks, shored up weak spots with timber, and slowly, carefully, made the passage wider. All the while, Isabel's voice guided them from the other side. She'd managed to stabilize most of the injured miners, using strips torn from her own dress when the bandages ran out. Her father coached her through procedures she'd only read about in medical books. The man with the broken leg needs a splint, Dr. Reyes called through the tunnel. Use whatever wood you can find. I'm using a pickaxe handle, Isabel replied, and I've got the bleeding stopped on the head injury. But Papa, one of the men isn't responding. His breathing is very shallow. Dr. Reyes's face went pale. Internal injuries, probably. The kind that needed surgery, not just first aid. We need to get them out now, he said to Ezra. Almost there, Ezra promised, hauling away another load of rocks. His hands were bloody and his back ached, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop. Finally, Murphy called out the words they'd all been waiting for. That's it. The tunnel's wide enough. The next few minutes were a carefully orchestrated rescue. One by one, the injured miners were pulled through the widened tunnel, with Isabel guiding each one and Dr. Reyes receiving them on the other side. The man with the broken leg came first, gritting his teeth against the pain. Then the one with the head injury, unconscious but breathing. Each rescue felt like a small miracle, but it was the eighth man, the one whose breathing had worried Isabel, who nearly broke Ezra's heart. He was barely conscious, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Internal bleeding, Dr. Reyes diagnosed immediately. We need to get him to a proper hospital fast. Nearest one's in Helena, Murphy said. 2 days' ride. He won't last 2 hours, Dr. Reyes replied grimly. We need to operate here. Here. Murphy looked around the dusty mine shaft in disbelief. Doctor, this ain't exactly sterile conditions. It's what we have, Dr. Reyes said firmly. Isabel, I need you to help me. This man's life depends on what we do in the next few minutes. As father and daughter prepared for emergency surgery by lamplight in a mine shaft, Ezra found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. A week ago, he'd been a solitary hunter who trusted no one and cared about nothing except his own survival. Now he was part of a team risking everything to save strangers. Now he was willing to die for people he'd just met. Now he understood what Isabel had meant when she talked about her father's belief that everyone deserved to be saved. The surgery took 30 minutes, with Isabel assisting her father like she'd been doing it for years. When it was over, the injured miner's breathing was stronger and his color had improved. Will he live? Ezra asked. If we can get him to proper medical facilities within the next day or two. Yes, Dr. Reyes said, wiping blood from his hands. It was close, but I think we got the internal bleeding stopped. As they prepared to move the injured miners to the surface, Isabel appeared at Ezra's side. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face streaked with dust and blood, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. We did it, she said quietly. We actually did it. You did it, Ezra corrected. I just moved some rocks. Isabel smiled and took his hand. You set off dynamite in a collapsing mine to save people you'd never met. That's not just moving rocks, Ezra. That's heroism. The word felt strange to Ezra. Heroes were people in stories, not broken men from the wilderness who'd learned about love by accident. But looking at Isabel's proud face, seeing the grateful expressions of the rescued miners, Ezra began to wonder if maybe heroes weren't born. Maybe they were just ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when the moment called for it. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming the kind of man worth loving after all. I've never seen anything like it. The sheriff's words carried across the crowded saloon as he raised his glass in a toast. 3 days had passed since the mine rescue, and the story had spread through Fort Benton like wildfire. Every detail had grown in the telling, until Ezra barely recognized himself in the tales being shared. To Ezra Blackwood, the sheriff continued, the man who saved 8 lives with nothing but dynamite and determination. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Ezra felt his face burn with embarrassment. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not the positive kind. All around him, people were smiling and nodding approval, the same people who'd looked at him with suspicion just days before. But it was the person sitting across from him who mattered most. Isabel's eyes sparkled with pride as she watched the celebration, her hand resting gently on his arm. Dr. Reyes sat beside them, looking tired but satisfied. They'd spent the last 3 days treating the rescued miners, and all 8 would make full recoveries. Speech! Speech! Someone called from the crowd. Ezra shook his head quickly. I ain't much for speeches. Come on, Blackwood! Murphy the mine foreman shouted. Say something. Reluctantly, Ezra stood up. The saloon fell silent. Every face turned toward him expectantly. He cleared his throat, trying to think of something appropriate to say. He looked at Isabel, who nodded encouragingly. I just did what needed doing. Those miners would have done the same for me. But you didn't even know them, someone called out. Ezra thought about that for a moment. It was true, he'd risked his life for complete strangers. A week ago, that would have seemed impossible. But now, sometimes, he said slowly, the most important thing you can do is help someone you don't know. Because if we only helped people we already cared about, the world would be a pretty lonely place. The crowd murmured approval, and Ezra sat down quickly, his part in the celebration finished. But as the evening wore on, he noticed something that made him uncomfortable. People kept approaching their table, but they weren't just congratulating him on the rescue. They were asking if he was available for hire. I've got a problem with claim jumpers, one prospector said quietly. Could use a man who's not afraid of a fight. There's bandits hitting supply wagons on the trail to Virginia City, another man added. Good money for someone who can handle trouble. Each offer was turned down politely, but they kept coming. By the end of the evening, Ezra felt sick to his stomach. These people weren't celebrating his heroism. They were shopping for a gunfighter. Later, as they walked back to their hotel through the quiet streets, Isabel sensed his mood. What's wrong? She asked. You should be happy. The whole town loves you now. Do they? Ezra asked bitterly. Or do they just love having their own personal killer? Dr. Reyes, walking slightly behind them, cleared his throat. Son, you can't control what other people think. You can only control what you do. But what if they're right? Ezra stopped walking, his hands clenched into fists. What if violence is all I'm good for? What if saving those miners was just another kind of fighting? Isabel turned to face him, her expression serious. Ezra, listen to me. There's a difference between a man who uses violence to hurt people and a man who uses it to protect them. You've spent your whole life thinking you were the first kind, but I've seen the truth. What truth? That you're the second kind. A protector, not a destroyer. She reached up to touch his face gently. Those miners are alive because you were willing to risk everything for strangers. That's not the action of a killer. It's the action of a guardian. They resumed walking, but Ezra's mind was still churning. Everything had changed so fast. A week ago, he'd been nobody special, just another drifter trying to survive. Now people were calling him a hero and offering him work as a hired gun. Which was the real him? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ezra was checking on Duke in the hotel stable when a familiar voice called his name. Ezra Blackwood? He turned to see a tall man in a clean uniform, wearing a badge that caught the morning sunlight. The man's face was weathered but kind, with the steady eyes of someone used to making hard decisions. I'm Marshal Wade Carson, the man said, extending his hand. I've been hearing stories about you. Ezra shook the offered hand cautiously. What kind of stories? The kind that make me think you might be interested in honest work. Marshal Carson studied Ezra's face carefully. I'm putting together a team of deputy marshals to help bring law and order to the territory. The pay's not great, but the work's important. You want me to be a lawman? Ezra couldn't hide his surprise. I want you to be what you've already proven you are. Someone who protects innocent people from those who would harm them. Carson leaned against the stable wall. The way I see it, you've got two choices. You can keep drifting, taking whatever work comes along, maybe ending up as just another gun for hire. Or you can use your skills to make a real difference. Before Ezra could respond, Isabel appeared in the stable doorway. Marshal Carson, what brings you to Fort Benton? Miss Reyes, good to see you again. Carson tipped his hat politely. I was just making your friend here an offer. Isabel looked between them, sensing the importance of the moment. What kind of offer? Carson explained his proposal while Ezra listened in growing amazement. A chance to wear a badge legally, to use his skills protecting people instead of just surviving, to be part of something bigger than himself. I need men who understand the frontier, Carson continued. Men who can handle themselves in dangerous situations but who also understand right from wrong. From what I've heard, you fit that description perfectly. I don't know, Ezra said slowly. I've never been much for following rules. The badge doesn't make you follow rules, Carson replied. It gives you the authority to enforce them. There's a difference. After Carson left, Ezra found himself alone with Isabel in the hotel garden. She was quiet, letting him work through his thoughts. What do you think? He finally asked. I think, Isabel said carefully, that you've spent your whole life running from who you thought you were. Maybe it's time to start running toward who you could become. And who's that? Isabel smiled, the same radiant expression that had first cracked the armor around his heart. A man who chooses to protect instead of destroy. A man who uses his strength to help others instead of just surviving. A man who deserves to be loved, and who's finally ready to love back. She was right, Ezra realized. For 28 years, he'd defined himself by his father's bitter lessons and his own isolation. But the past week had shown him a different possibility, a chance to be the kind of man Isabel believed he could be. There's just one problem, he said quietly. What's that? If I take Carson's job, I'll be traveling all over the territory. Dangerous places, uncertain schedule. That's no life for a doctor's daughter. Isabel's laugh was like music in the morning air. Ezra Blackwood, did you really think I was going to let you wander off without me? Papa and I have been talking about expanding our medical missions. We could cover a lot more ground with a deputy marshal helping us reach the places that need doctors most. The possibility hit Ezra like sunrise after a long night. Not just a job, but a purpose. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Not just love, but a partnership built on shared dreams. You'd do that? He asked. You'd give up the comfortable life to travel with a man like me? Ezra, Isabel said softly. I wouldn't give up anything. I'd be gaining everything. A chance to help people, to see the world, to build something meaningful with the man I love. She took his hands in hers, and Ezra felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. I love you too, Isabel Reyes, he said, the words coming easier than he'd thought possible. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth your faith. Their kiss was gentle and full of promise, the beginning of something neither had dared hope for just a week before. Around them, Fort Benton went about its morning business, but for Ezra and Isabel, the world had narrowed to this moment, this choice, this new beginning. When they broke apart, Ezra was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in years. So, Isabel said with a grin, shall we go find Marshal Carson and tell him he's got himself a new deputy? Ezra looked at the badge Carson had left on the garden table, then at the woman who'd taught him that love wasn't a weakness but the greatest strength of all. Yes, he said quietly, let's go change the world. And hand in hand, they walked toward a future neither could have imagined alone, but both were ready to build together.